Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. We're talking about a lot of things in this show while we chew the gum. And as always, on each and every show, we always have
something for your mind. Something for your mind. Something for your mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것이 필요합니까?
Something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요.
Something for your
Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. I'm your host, Protocol, and in the studio today we have a very special guest to speak with you about issues that affect our daughters, our sons, our families, our communities, and we really think you're going to enjoy this useful information. My guest today will be Terry Boykins of Street Positive. Unfortunately, today we encountered some heavy traffic or some type of technical difficulty, so the session you're about to hear will have less than perfect audio quality. It won't be our usual sound format or not even the sound you're hearing now. However, we didn't let technology get in the way. We patched in the sound, and you will hear the first portion of this session with part 2 soon to come. We thank you for joining us. Let's go. Okay, welcome to another edition of Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. Who says you can't chew gum and talk? I think you can. I think it's a good thing, gives you rhythm and focus. You can find this podcast on all platforms, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify. If you'd like to support the show, please go to anchor.fm/protocol. That's PROTKALL. And feel free to donate 99 cents, $4.99, or $9.99 a month, or just drop us a line. Also, feel free to call into the show anytime for topics you want to discuss or to be a guest. Today, I have a very special guest that I'm glad to have on the show. We have Mr. Terry Boykins. He is a CEO or stakeholder, at least, in the Daughters Lives Matter movement. You can find more information at daughterslivesmatter.com. So let's go ahead and bring in Mr. Boykins. We're going to have a great discussion today. So listen in. Welcome, Mr. Boykins. How are you?
Dr. Quanta, thank you. I appreciate you having me on your show.
I mean, it definitely was a pleasure and something that I wanted to do from the very beginning of me having this show. You know, we met a few years back, and I knew you were doing great things, and the topics that you share and that you host on your site are relevant, man. And so those are the types of things and the type of information we want to put out to the listeners. I had a distinct pleasure in listening to one of your shows last night, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and about the Daughters Lives Matter movement.
Well, Street Positive, which is one of the stakeholders in the Daughters Lives Matter movement, was established in 1997. And the reason why it was established is because after leaving corporate America, I found myself being confronted with individuals that were approaching me to help fund their respective agency or their particular mission as relates to child maltreatment. Coming out of corporate America, wasn't really engaged because I was focusing on things of Wall Street or doing business with Fortune 500 companies. And so whatever I could do, giving back to the community, growing up in the inner city, having had a chance to become a corporate executive, and then have some resources to make a difference. It became very interesting to become aware of how many children were being neglected or abused. And so Street Positive began to work with different organizations, one of which had to do with some hip hop artists that were really in the cut back in the 80s and 90s, using hip hop for social causes before all the gangster rap got into it and This was really about them doing their business, about putting the message out. And one of the things we had a chance to put our message out about was about not abusing and sexually molesting children. And so we did a piece called Safe and Sound in Our Town, which was a big hit. I had a chance to become the executive producer, underwrite that, and it went on to sell about 800,000 copies just on the street. And we were moving the CD for $5 all over the country that people were buying, and then they were buying it and giving it out, and people were buying it because of the message. And of course, that hip hop beat was in it. And so from there, Street Positive began to engage in different capacities, but more importantly, the fatherhood component, which I started getting tapped for as a result of working with social workers, and particularly Caucasian social workers that were sharing with me about, do you know what's going on? And I was like, well, sort of. It wasn't really like I understood the question. You know, I mean, I know what's going on. You know, what time is it? But they said, do you know what's going on? And so they started sharing with me about the trends in incarceration, about black males. Did you remember what happened back in the 70s when they were keeping men from coming around the house and so forth? And men were trying to make money to take care of their kids. And then all of a sudden the incarceration game got put into place. And then when that started being discussed, I got it. So men were out of the home, out of the family. Young men were being exposed to the game on the street, banging on the street, dealing on the street, swinging on the street. And they were now creating this whole pathway to prison. And the correlation between, if you take, and this is what a social worker told me, if we can remove the man from the home, we can control communities for generations.
How about that? And I think that would be true of any group anywhere in the world if you remove the leadership. Absolutely.
And that's
let me go.
With the word.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Mr. Boyd, because I wanted to go back a minute because you dropped a lot of useful information, and I want to just make sure it's out there. So first, let me correct myself. Street Positive, the relationship with Daughters Lives Matter is Street Positive. Your organization is a contributor to that group. Is that correct?
Yes, contributor and the founder.
Contributor and founder. Excellent. And we're definitely going to talk more about that. The next thing that I wanted to reflect on is you talked about the song, the hip hop song. And you know, I'm from the early hip hop generation where it was also about a message. You know, you had brag rap, but the message was the core, and that's what brought the people together. It's like the beating of the drum. Here's the message, the town riot, right? And so
correct.
The particular song you said, I want to just let everybody know again, what's the name of the song? Safety for
the name is Safe and Sound in Our Town.
Safe and Sound in Our Town. Okay, all right. Safe and Sound in Our Town. No, I like that, man. 800,000 copies. That's impressive, and I'm sure it is a song that may resonate today. So if it's still out there and available, people can go and look it up and just take a listen. I think hip hop today is missing a lot of that message. You also talked about fatherhood, and I just wanted to reflect on that. When you talked to, you said a colleague or social worker who happened to be Caucasian. And I was just thinking that, you know, in these times, whether it's Caucasian to Black or Vietnamese to South Korean, whatever it may be, anytime there is the potential for a cultural disconnect, and disconnects don't have to be cultural, but anytime there's a disconnect culturally or a translation needed, I think it's so important that people reach out across cultural lines. And I too have had individuals who are Caucasian that would approach me and ask me, and I appreciated their humility and honesty in saying that we need someone that understands, right? Rather than trying to administer medicines for something you don't know, you ask someone in the know and let them help. So this idea that they were able to reach out to you in that way, and then you to be able to pick up the information and solidify it into a movement to you know, rectify the problem is great. And you mentioned social services and men being out of the home, and I do remember that. Where if you need, I mean, it's a situation where you're too poor to be rich and too rich to be poor. You don't qualify. And so you had people who needing maybe some social assistance, but if they received it, there couldn't be a working man in the home. Well, that pretty much was a predominant thing for many poor communities, and unfortunately, the African American community at that time and place was maybe amongst the highest percentage-wise. Obviously, Caucasian Americans overall were the majority, but the idea that no man in the home, so you can't be there with your kids to raise them, to provide guidance, to pimp proof them, as you'll talk about later. And it reminds me of a movie, Claudine. If anyone hasn't seen that movie, it's a perfect example where she's trying to make it. She has lots of kids. You have a pretty good man who comes in, a garbage worker who's trying to help out, but because she receives welfare, she can't even have a boyfriend or a man around the house. So that's important, and that leading to incarceration. And it's just a plethora of things that you laid down. So I just wanted to reflect on those for a minute and highlight them because they're important. But
absolutely,
please continue. Go ahead, continue.
Well, and so this basically gave me a perspective. Once again, coming from corporate America, having come from the inner city, become formally educated, received 3 degrees, went into corporate America, came out of corporate America. So you transcend from the hood, which is progressing from where you come from. But now, you get a chance to have a moment where you can stop and start realizing where you do come from and what really were the issues while you were away. And while you are making your money, a lot of stuff is still going on in the hood. And so what I began to realize is that there was inactivity with the real issues, the root cause of things, the trauma, the domestic violence, the sexual abuse that your sister was dealing with or your cousin was dealing with, or in some cases that young man was dealing with, and things just wasn't getting talked about. And so as I began to push some more money into resources and supporting things, it became more obvious that we got a problem, and we got a problem that is greater than all the things that are going on in the moment that the media is saying. And the destruction and the collapse of the family was happening right before our eyes. And so as I looked at this, fatherhood, Philip Jackson from the Black Star Project, God rest his soul, who passed away just a couple of years ago, had contacted me and said, hey, look, I know you're doing some things with fatherhood on the West Coast. I want to talk about bringing the Million Father March. This is the early stages, 2004, 2005. After they had met. And so I had a chance to, pull some folks together out here on the West Coast, from Northern California, Arizona, Southern Cal, the IE, and Long Beach, all throughout, and we put on, that expansion. But it was, of course, taking their children to the first day of school, and the impact that makes on both the educators as well as the peers of their children. Something about the presence of men in the community on a school campus, the first day of school, sends a message that daddy's in the house. And so whatever else you want to think that you can get away with, just remember, daddy is in the house with a child. So if the bully's on campus and he or she sees all those men walking their kids, their attitude about attacking that one child, because they're going to remember that day. I got to watch myself because they got a daddy over there. And so bullies, this is why we was rolling like that. And so even with regards to even teachers about treating kids a certain way, something about a teacher knowing there's a father that's in the equation is going to think differently about how they deal with that child, because they know there's a father around. And so the power of that became very reticent. So as time went on, fast forward to Daughters Lives Matter, a lot of the work I had been doing, and of course gone on to do with mentoring, and was recognized around the country for the different mentoring programs, and had a chance to connect with Campaign for Black Male Achievement. Shout out to Sean Dove with the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, the Rumble in Louisville, Kentucky at the Muhammad Ali Center. But more and more people kept saying, Terry, what about fathers and daughters? And I was really focusing on the father-son, the manhood component.